Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me in another video. So we're going to be talking today about the Chanel debut collection by Matthieu Blazy. There's so much to unpack. The anticipation, the excitement, just from seeing the set, I thought it was really exciting. I always think of how epic Karl Lagerfeld's sets were with the space theme. I think of the spaceship. But I thought that the way the images translated on social media, it worked for that. It was making enough of a statement. The music, the Dawson's Creek moment transitioning, and then there was Rhythm as a Dancer, really unexpected, but I think it really worked. I thought it was also interesting that he said he could start with the legacy of Coco Chanel, or he could go to the last day of Chanel. And that's what he went for. So I thought that was an interesting perspective. I also thought the references were really clever. There was a clear nod to early Coco Chanel with the lowered waist. There was also a menswear slant. And there was this ongoing dialogue of this masculine feminine balance. There was also this kind of concept of like wardrobing, especially with the first several looks. But then there was also this side of high craft. I think when looking at this and looking at what he's proposing, going back to Chanel roots, a time when freedom and movement were revolutionary ideas in women's fashion, I think his woman feels freer. I couldn't help but also think about his thesis collection about the first French woman in space. And I think there is a connection here with the theme. I think this idea of liberation in style and in spirit. He took the house codes, the tweed, the suit, the jewelry, the layering, and made them distinctly his. And I think there was a lot of injection of his own style, like the high craft elements, the fringing, a lot of these very crafty looks. But then there was also this side of looks that felt a little bit more pared back. There were moments that did feel Bottega, the textures, the way he approached some of the volumes here. And I also think the Bottega customer will probably follow him. I think the Chanel customer, I can see many of them gravitating towards this, maybe not all, but I think he is going to bring in a new perspective and I think a new generation of consumers. There were less logos on logos. There still were some moments of branding, but to me it felt cleaner. A lot of this feels very now. A lot of what we are seeing in fashion now. I think Chanel as a brand was really clinging on to the Karl years. Don't get me wrong, I love that era. That's what got me into Chanel. I love the spectacle, the sets, the energy. I think that's what won over so many women. I can remember the Chanel show that made me dream about this brand. I also think Matthieu Blazy is steering Chanel towards something that is, I think, a lot more intellectual. I don't think we're seeing this fantasy that Karl brought. Matthieu Blazy, he's a designer that is a lot more conceptual, and there's a sophistication to what he does. He spoke to a woman that exists already today. And then there was this post on their Instagram, quote, an imaginary conversation with Gabrielle Chanel and a return to her personal style, masculine, feminine, as well as her fundamental fabrics, tweed, jersey, and silk, reworked, recut, and reinterpreted. Also, it begins with menswear, with a menswear tradition, a shirt borrowed and worn by Gabrielle Chanel from Boy Capel, her most significant other. The shirt then was by historic French shirt maker Charvet. Today it is made together with Chanel. Really connected this all to me was how Chanel, the brand, is now looking at Coco and Matthieu Blazy's perspective that he is looking at her legacy, which was interesting to me and how we're seeing that in his fashion. So this from a Business of Fashion article, Blazy referred to Chanel's attitude as, quote, bric-a-brac, a kind of pragmatic grab bag approach to the world around her, careless of convention like wearing her lover's shirt or using the silk jersey his underwear was cut from in her collection. Legend has it that she made the Marinier, the striped tailor t-shirt, fashionable, but Picasso and his cool artist crowd were already wearing them. Quote, it's not that she was the first woman, but what is incredible is that she wanted to belong, so she decided to wear it well like them. So she was very much a woman of her time, but she took a decision, quote, I love it, this is mine, on a lot of the codes. This was the way, according to Blazy, she claimed tweed from boys' jackets, and for the other pillars of the Chanel brand, pearls were very trendy and everyone had camellias. So you can't say that Chanel created this because she also took the essence of what was around her. She was practical. And I found this interpretation of Coco's work from a perspective that I guess it was unexpected, but I think when looking at some of Matthieu Blazy's work, it makes sense. And taking that essence of what is around him, this quote, the bric-a-brac pragmatism, this theme of universality, his Chanel, it's not necessarily about what he does as being first. It's taking the essence of what is around him and doing it well. This look of chic that we're seeing. And with the ready-to-wear, there is this move to tailoring, to wardrobing, to the masculine, feminine, mostly longer skirts, even like these flamenco dresses. But what was notable to me, I always think of the Chanel suit, the deconstruction of this Chanel suit, the frayed edges, the use of fringe, crocheting of the materials. And it has this very like process as art vibe to it. And as a result, I think more of a roughness brought to the Chanel suit, which always had this look of neatness. And during especially the Karl years, a perkiness about it. This suit looks at more of the material construction, which is a very Bottega thing, but also remember he was at Margiela, and it feels relaxed, again, masculine, feminine. Even the use of color to me was less of, I think, the traditional Chanel color combinations. I was also reading about how Matthieu Blazy worked with the artist Sterling Ruby during the Raf Simons era with Calvin Klein. Raf Simons has also collabed with this artist, but I'm seeing this similar color and design language here, the orangey reds, the teals, the metals, colors that feel very industrial. And again, it kind of adds this contrast to this Chanel. It sort of looks at the Chanel suit and there's more aggression to it. Especially when I think of Virginie, the colors were softer. There was harmony, Barbie pinks, and overall prettiness that speaks to a certain side of femininity. This, it's very jarring. And again, going back to Chanel, this idea of universalism, there is, I think, this air of something forward with this masculine, feminine idea, but also I think beyond that, this idea of Chanel as universal, the idea of the masculine, feminine, and what I mean by that is, for instance, there was Lux Pascal, Pedro Pascal's sister, who is trans, and she was on the runway. And I just thought that was a beautiful moment. I'm also reminded he is a millennial. He's much younger than I think a lot of the other designers that have been designing. And I think there is this generational change in fashion with this new guard. Of course, we're going to talk about bags. I feel like I could do a deeper dive on this, but I just think we have to talk about them. A lot of these are going to be commercial hits. Some were definitely playful, some extremely wearable. And I also feel like this masculine, feminine energy was felt with a lot of these bags. Of course, this was a women's collection, but we saw like Pedro Pascal was at the show. I can totally picture Jacob Elordi wearing so many of these designs. Again, this masculine, feminine idea really came through here. I also loved the Minaudières, the universe clutch, the egg bag, how it connected with this bird theme, and of course this egg motif at Chanel. I think there's so many great bags for a variety of different people. There is this tension between masculine and feminine that was present here. And I also think this destroyed flat bag was hilarious. I think of how when Karl brought the reissue, it had the distressed leather. Matthieu Blazy took that, made it even more extreme. And it nods to, I think, this idea of imperfection and aging. This bag, looking at like Demna's Gucci Jackie, this took it to the next level, honestly. Also need to mention this Surf executive tote. To me, bringing this back, this is a very polished looking bag, very professional, but it's got this bright color and it does have that moment of branding. But again, it's not as loud, definitely a cleaner shape, closer to the row, but maybe a little bit more like Phoebe Philo Celine in that bright color, or even more like a Raf Simons Jill Sander. I also thought this clutch with the side CC, it's very chic with that little detail at that corner. Also the burgundy clutch, very interesting to me because Chanel under the Karl and Virginie years were going for a completely different look. There was also this bird bag, this white kiss lock bag with the CC, as well as this clutch, this double-sided flap. So this is closer to a Karl reference. The chevron bag with the multiple contrasting colors. There was, I think, an assortment of styles. Personally, I'm so ready for this. I don't know if this is going to appeal to every Chanel customer, but I think it speaks to this current style of chic. I actually think there's a lot more appeal to, again, this masculine feminine. Personally, I haven't bought Chanel in many years, yet it is the biggest brand in my collection when it comes to handbags. I think a lot of what I'm seeing already speaks to my style personally. I can't deny deny this. There's also a side of me while following this whole Chanel change, this whole lead up. There is a side of me that really wanted, I know I sound like a broken record, but like I was hoping for a woman creative director. I think especially with this season and the lack of female representation, again, I had a hesitancy with this, as well as I think in general. There have been moves that the brand has done that just has not appealed to me. But I will say, I think Matthieu Blazy with this collection, it feels closer to Coco Chanel herself. Again, with these relaxed looks, this look of comfort and theme of freedom. With those kinds of themes, I'm with him. I look at a lot of what I'm seeing on the runway, not everything, but there are a lot of things, the shirts, the wardrobing like pieces. Again, there's this ease and comfort that was felt in this collection, but then there was also experimentation and craft. I also think he's being really true to himself. I think with this conceptual side, again, the destroyed 255, the willingness to confront the legacy of this head on. Think about the legacy of this, how revolutionary it was, how Karl appropriated it with his own classic flap, and then he reissued it 20 years ago. Probably at this point, this bag and, flat bags, be it the reissue or the classic flap, of course, we've seen the rising price increases. The brand has achieved so much in terms of commercial success, but I also think this bag has been pushed to its limit, and that's what this bag feels like to me. What he is tasked with at Chanel, it's not just to create really great looking bags or super fashionable, super stylish, super trendy jackets and suits. Like, it's not just about great clothes and great bags. He has to create products that, when we're talking about bags, compete with Hermes, but when it comes to fashion, they're the top of the food chain. Chanel has to be the best of the best. I also think it needs to be met with the quality, and I'm sure the business side is absolutely aware of this. Now, I didn't love the shoes. There was also this moment where this model, she was carrying the shoe with the ready to wear. There were some moments of incredible craftsmanship. I think it's one of these things where you see it on the runway and you don't really see the details, but there was so much detail in this collection. Again, this theme of high craft with the tweed, this sort of more experimental look, and I think this was probably what I expected the most. And there was this moment with these skirts that had just this movement, so we got that like high craft side, but then there was this aspect of wardrobing. Another point that I thought was interesting on their Instagram, they talked about this idea of Chanel women, stating, above all, there is an idea of freedom, of a new universal dress, and a borderless blending of styles, the inheritance of not just one Chanel woman, but rather of Chanel women. And I thought this was emblematic of the direction of Chanel. There's this idea of freedom, of movement. There's also one thing I cannot help but notice this season, just looking at a brand like Chanel specifically. Virginie was a designer that got a lot of flack, I think a lot of online, I'm going to say specifically online hate. People were very vocal. There was a lot of criticism towards Virginie, and I would also extend that towards Maria Grazia Chiuri. But Virginie Viard especially, I think, when looking at her fashion on the runways, we saw healthier looking models. Women also could imagine what they would look like in her fashion. But I think she took a lot of what Karl did, took a perspective that was more empathetic. Again, Karl made some very problematic statements. Now, I always love to get your perspective. I know that not everyone's, of course, going to love it, but I think a lot of people did really like it. Now, in terms of comments, something new for Chanel in 30 years, a breath of fresh air. Totally agree. It was needed, and there was enough tweed for the loyal Chanel customer. Fresh and exciting pieces with reference to almost all the decades. And also, this is only the first collection by Matthieu Blazy, so the second and third will only get better and better because he will, by time, will have a better understanding and experience of the Chanel world. One thing about Matthieu Blazy, though, is he did get time to really soak in Chanel as a brand compared to a lot of the other designers. That's really good that Chanel gave him time, and I think that's also what makes Chanel so unique. It is a private company. It doesn't have to respond to the immediate demands of shareholders colors. Someone else says, I also really like the planetary set. There's also something that I really liked about it. It did kind of have this DIY quality to it. It didn't feel like so perfect. Like it kind of gave me the vibes of going to a science center or a planetarium or something with my 4-year-old at a children's museum, which I thought was quite sweet. It reminded me of that. Someone else says, oh gosh, yes, screenshots overload. So proud of Matthieu, who carries a bit of Belgian. Chanel is cool again. It was really good. It felt like Chanel. Shoes, bags were very nice. He didn't completely repeat what he was doing at Bottega, even though there was hints of it. I definitely think there was hints of it with like the little hats, the texture, the volume. I didn't understand the theme of the venue with the planets and stuff though. I wish he would have kept it white, black, beige, and minimal for his debut, but overall, I really loved it. It's gonna sell for sure. I do think having that background made it pop a little bit more, as despite all of these debuts, despite everyone, you know, talking about all of these other brands, it felt like Chanel was ultimately at the center of the universe. That's what I thought. Someone else said Bottega at Chanel. I actually thought it was very Bottega, but not in a bad way. Someone said it did look like Bottega, but I'm not complaining. I was always a fan of Bottega ready to wear. Someone else says Chanel looks like Bottega. Bottega looks like Celine. Celine looks like Phoebe Philo. Loewe also looks like Phoebe Philo. Dior looks like Loewe. There is definitely that in fashion. I'm actually 50-50 on this. I don't dislike any of it. It's all stunning. I'm split between the freshness of the collection and the lack of overwhelmingly obvious Chanel motifs. I almost get a Nicolas Guesquet futuristic play on Chanel. Objectively, a beautiful collection. You cannot deny that. I think he worked hard for this collection, but the collection is lacking of consistency and it doesn't feel like Chanel. I like the new Bottega collection than this one for sure. The new Bottega collection was one of my favorites. It was so beautiful. It's recognizably Chanel, but in a modern way that looks much more fun to wear today. I specifically liked how the skirts were constructed, draped beautifully, and look really cool. I wasn't a fan of some of the shoes because they look just a little too cartoony, specifically the shoes that almost wrapped around the whole foot, kind of like Minnie Mouse shoes. Those didn't work for me. Aside from the shoes, it was a great collection. I love to see more from Matthieu. I agree with the comments that it was good, but no obvious Chanel codes. So well, next collection, we shall see if Blazy can sprinkle some Chanel codes in, because that's what makes it unique while still keeping the more relaxed minimalist vibe. A more balanced look between the new and the old, and the shock of no Chanelisms is not that great, but overall I think it's the right direction. I'm mixed on this. I love the color story, but arguably this could be under any other designer name. I'd like it a lot. A bit underwhelmed with the expectation of the Chanel name. Makes me a bit sad for Virginie. I don't think anyone who followed Karl could succeed her, but eventually even Karl's vision would fall out of favor with fashion of the times. Maybe it's just a realignment after a high. No brand could stay on top forever. I'm loving the way Matthieu is modernizing the classic Chanel silhouette with slight deliberate modifications. He was confident enough to interpret the brand's heritage with his point of view and in his own way. It's a debut. I hate the collection, but I believe there's time to grow. And I think overall, Matthieu Blazy probably had the best reception when compared to the other luxury brands. Of course, some people probably have their favorites. I definitely have my favorites. Chanel was not my favorite show of the season, but I think it really hit a lot of really important notes. When it came to the bags, there was that depth of craft, that thoughtfulness throughout the collection. I also thought it was very Matthieu Blazy. When I think of his background from being with Raf Simons, Nicolas Guesquet, Balenciaga, Maison Margiela, Phoebe Philo, Celine, and of course he led Bottega Veneta, but it is his voice. And I think he has found a way to make Chanel feel very today, feel very for the modern luxury woman. These are clothes and bags that connect with the present moment. This collection is beautifully made, clearly intelligent. The craftsmanship has this engineering quality. There's so much in the details, like a density in the details. There is something very familiar to me, and I think maybe this is where I wonder about this. I also think it plays into like this growing look across luxury fashion, this kind of new universal chic that prioritizes refinement and intellect. Matthieu Blazy's Chanel, it's engineered beautifully, but it just has this look of familiarity. And I think Chanel was once modern because it broke boundaries of what women could wear. And I think for all of this talk of universality, this look of craft, I wonder, where is this rift? risk? Where is the vulnerability, the emotion, the attitude of Coco Chanel herself? Again, this is definitely a new departure for Chanel, so I commend the brand for doing that. Like, this is a definite change. Of course, this is a first collection. I'm excited to see what happens next. I'm trying to be really nuanced with my take here, but looking back, as mentioned earlier, Chanel was a woman of her time. Yes, there were shared house codes, ideas that circulated, themes of like the camellia, borrowing men's shirts, but there was a distinction between her, between Madeleine Vionnet, Elsa Schiaparelli, Jean Lanvin, the list goes on. During that era where women designers were celebrated for their different points of view, what defined that era wasn't a universality. Fashion had a difference of creative voices. I don't look at fashion as like a single story told to all. For me, it's many, many stories. It's so many stories told beautifully, differently. And without that, to me, it ceases to be culture.